Hey everybody, welcome back to Pulp Hero Audio. Today I'm going to be talking about the 1997 movie KULL the Conqueror, directed by John Nicolella. If you notice the title of this video, I called it, "Why Do I Love This Terrible Movie?" Because it's really not that good, quite honestly. I mean, it is KULL the Conqueror, so it is based upon the character Kull, created by Robert E. Howard, the same writer who created Conan. In fact, Conan and Kull occupy the same world, just at very different times. Kull is probably, I would say he's in the top three most well-known Robert E. Howard characters. Of course, behind Conan, obviously, and then up there maybe somewhere with Solomon Kane. So, let's talk about this movie. Why do I like it? Well, first of all, I think it probably has a little bit of something to do at the time in which I saw it. I remember seeing this movie as a teenager in the theater. At that time, I knew next to nothing about Robert E. Howard, had never read any of his original stories, be it Conan, Kull, or anything. So I had no expectations about this movie. Really didn't know that it was in any way, shape, or form even connected to the character of Conan the Barbarian. So it wasn't like I was going in with any kind of expectations. So for that reason, I think, there was nothing to really disappoint me at the time that I saw it. Now, of course, since then, I have read Robert E. Howard's Kull stories. And, if you're looking for that in this movie, if you're looking for that character, that depiction, that sort of feel, then I'm sorry, you're going to be very disappointed. So, again, I think the timing and probably my own ignorance about Howard's work and his characters probably had something to do with why I'm still kind of fond of this goofy movie even to this day. So what was it about it that I really liked? Well, at the beginning you see, or hear rather, the narration at the beginning, which I thought was actually kind of cool, talking about, the flame of Acheron and the god Vulca and godless times, and, it sounded interesting. Again, if you are a Howard fan, if you've read his work, some of those names are probably familiar, and you probably cringed watching this movie in the way that they, got things wrong and contradicted this and things of that nature. And then, after the narration, we jump right into, Kull, fighting a bunch of guys in the water with his axe. I think the water was kind of a nice touch because he is Kull of Atlantis, after all, which we tend to think of being as underwater. I'll get into more of some of that stuff later, some things I thought that this movie actually did in kind of a clever way, that being one of them. But of course, as he's fighting, we don't get some sort of epic sort of soundtrack. We don't get, like Basil Polidorus's themes like we, had in the Conan the Barbarian movie. We get kind of this kind of classic rock theme, this, this kind of, it's this kind of cheesy but catchy at the same time sort of rock music soundtrack and a little bit of heavy metal. I don't know. It just kind of worked. And, as a teenager watching this movie, I was like, oh, that's cool, rock and roll, but it's barbarians and swords and axes and things of that nature. So I'm sorry, but I kind of like that. Of course, playing Kull was Kevin Sorbo, which under a different director with a different script, I think he probably could have played a much truer version of Howard's Kull of Atlantis quite well. I think he was a pretty decent pick. And it probably made sense for the time because, 97, it was in the heyday of when he was playing Hercules on television with the Legendary Journeys TV show and its spin-off Xena and all of that, which was kind of a thing at the time. Just the tone of the movie was very different than what you might expect for something based on Robert E. Howard's work. It seemed to rely a lot more on fun and humor. It didn't really take itself all that seriously. Almost kind of like Robert E. Howard's world meets, the Marvel Cinematic Universe or something like that. But it kind of reminded me of other movies of that time period. Dragonheart, Army of Darkness, where they kind of had that humor element in there that you normally might not see in that kind of genre, but for whatever reason, it kind of worked, I guess. But yeah, I enjoyed some of the jokes. I enjoyed some of the humor. Now, if they were going to make a Kull movie today, would I want them to go that route? Well, no. But Kull the Conqueror, for its time, for what it was, I still kind of like it. There have been worse movies than Kull the Conqueror. As far as the humor goes, a lot of that depended upon some of the supporting characters. We had several different sort of foppish, effete, not very masculine sort of characters. We had the kind of goofy cousin of the king that died early on in the movie that allowed not Conan, but Kull, that's probably going to happen a lot, that allowed Kull to become king. But of course, he didn't have the strength or the will to really assert his claim to the throne. And then you had the eunuch, too, who was, so concerned about the law and civilization, and more about that later, and sticking to etiquette and protocol and things of that nature. And then you had Juba, the sort of merchant, scoundrel, black market type guy that betrays Conan. He has that voice, played by actor Harvey Fierstein, however it's pronounced. He has that voice, Cal, you know what I'm talking about. Not that I can do it very well. But they added a lot of humor to the film. And I don't know, perhaps today, maybe in today's times, people might be perhaps offended by that depiction as being comic relief. I don't know, but I think it actually plays rather well into one of the themes of the movie. One of the themes which Robert E. Howard focused on quite a bit in both his Kull and Conan stories. And I think if you really look closely, this movie actually did a fairly good job of doing. And that was the whole theme of civilization versus barbarism. Because as the movie begins, that's kind of what we see. We see Kull, this barbarian, this axe-swinging barbarian, and he's sort of trying to join the civilized world. He's in sort of an audition, a tryout, to join some sort of elite group of warriors, the Dragon Legion, or something to that effect. But yet, the leader of that group, Talagaro, He refuses Kull entry based on the fact that he doesn't have noble blood. The idea that somehow if you come from a particular noble family, nobility, civilization, that kind of thing, that somehow makes you better. It somehow makes you better at, killing, which is, essentially what these warriors do. And Kull has, a pretty good line in there. There's actually several pretty good lines in this movie. He says, my blood is as red as any man's. And then right on the heels of that, they find out that the king of Volusia, King Borna, is slaughtering all of his heirs, all of his children. And Kull has the line, noble blood all over the palace floor. And, I thought that was just kind of a nice touch, because here is this group that's supposed to be oh so civilized. They have these written laws which they value so much, and yet what is the king of their civilization doing? He's slaughtering his own children, slaughtering his heirs, because he sees them as some sort of threat to his throne. Speaking of which, going with that theme, as Kull kills the king, and just before that, the king says, hey, Kull, you take the crown, you be king. And according to the civilized laws of Volusia in this movie, that makes Kull king, regardless of his blood or his background or anything like that. And one of the first things that Kull runs into is the fact that Volusia practices slavery. Again, here's the irony. They're supposed to be civilized. They're civilization. They are the enlightened ones, if you will. Yet here they are practicing something, that most would consider to be barbaric, that being slavery. And here is this barbarian who has actually experienced life as a slave, as he alludes to in his background. And one of the first things that he tries to do is bring an end to that. So it takes a barbarian to realize, the evils of such a thing in this so-called civilization. And we see that Kull, right off the bat, in many ways, makes for a better king than Borna or any of these men of noble blood. He even bows to the ladies. Another good line in there. Even a king should bow to the ladies, as he bows to Borna's harem, whom he inherits as he becomes king. A member of that harem being Zaretta, who will play into the film's story quite a bit. There are a few callbacks to both the Howard stories, including Conan. I thought it was interesting that Kull, as a pirate, he was the tiger, whereas Conan in the Howard story Queen of the Black Coast, his name is Amra, or the lion. So Conan was the pirate lion, and here we have Kull as the pirate tiger. And they do work in some Howardisms throughout the film. Toward the end, we get the whole "by this axe I rule." We get that line. Several times, characters will refer to another character as a dog. To me, that's a very Howard sort of thing. That was one of the common insults you see in his stories, as characters will refer to each other as dogs. And now, of course, we did have some cheesy stuff, a lot of overacting. I think a lot of that comes from Inaros, the priest who brings back to life or resurrects the Red Witch, Akivasha, which some more on her and some of her cheesy stuff later. So, Akivasha. Howard fans might recognize that name from Howard's Conan story, The Hour of the Dragon. Now, of course, Akivasha in this movie, very, very, very loosely based upon that character, as she is quite different. Akivasha in this film, played by Tia Carrere. Hey, remember Tia Carrere? Wayne's World! You know, she was the girl from Wayne's World. And then there she was as the villain, no less, which I thought was kind of an interesting touch at that time, to have the principal villain be a female, which, you know, actually kind of works. Speaking of some other themes, we see quite a bit the theme of fire and ice. Of course, you've got the flame of Acheron, the Red Witch, but then you've got, you know, Valka, the god Valka, the breath of Valka, which is, you know, ice-based, so we got kind of that fire and ice sort of thing going on, which I think works quite well. Speaking of Akivasha again, some of her lines were some of the strangest. There's one line in particular that jumps out at me simply because it is, quite frankly, it is almost a verbatim ripoff of a line of Darth Vader's from The Empire Strikes Back. There's actually a point where Talagaro is upset because she is changing the conditions of their pact, and she says, I'm altering our pact. Pray I don't alter it farther, or something to that effect. Almost exactly like what Darth Vader said to Lando Calrissian in The Empire Strikes Back when he says, I'm altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it farther. And that wasn't the only little callback to Star Wars. Kull is rather threatened, a bit jealous by Volka's priest, Ascalante, because of how close he seems to the woman Zaretta, only to find out that Ascalante is her brother, and he seems quite relieved by that, much like Han Solo did when he found out that Luke Skywalker was Princess Leia's brother in Return of the Jedi. So Kull, of course, goes through his adventure. That they get the breath of Valka, this ice-based sort of thing that will hopefully take down this 3,000-year-old Acheronian Red Witch, which reminds me of another line when someone says, because Kull ends up marrying the Red Witch when he's under her spell. And he's informed, that, hey, your bride is 3,000 years old. And Kull's like, she said she was 19. Although on what planet he would have thought that Tia Carrere was 19 in this movie, I don't know. She was 30, by the way. But that wasn't the only kind of odd things in this movie. There seemed to be a lot of background to Kull that really wasn't ever explained. Because it's pretty clear that he and the King Borna actually knew each other. Because the king, calls him by name when he hands him the crown. So I'm wondering, what was Kull prior to his auditioning for the Dragon Legion? Was he just another soldier in the king's army? What exactly was he that he had any associations with the king whatsoever? He even mentions one episode where he grabbed Zaretta while he was drunk, which made the king angry. And I'm thinking, dude, how are you still alive? I mean, in this time, in this sort of setting, don't you get killed, executed, if you touch, a member of the king's harem, one of the king's women? So some of that was rather odd in the way that Conan seemed to... Sorry, I keep saying it. I know. Kull. They are different characters. Kull clearly had some sort of a past, some sort of connection to the royal court, to Borna, that is never really explained in this movie. This movie did have a lot of action that was kind of cool, but it was PG-13. So much like the old Conan the Barbarian series from Marvel Comics that had the comics code, because of its rating, this movie was limited in what it could show as far as blood and gore. In fact, in the production notes, the director even boasts about the fact that they had something like 10 different sword fights, but there wasn't a single drop of blood. And I'm sure, that's not something that most Howard fans would be, boasting about, would be proud of. The fact that the violence was kind of sanitized with the sword fights. Speaking of swords, Kull is sort of mocked by Talagaro because he uses an axe, a barbarian's weapon, rather than a civilized, a nobleman's weapon like a sword, which again brings back that theme of Howard's of civilization versus barbarism. Because at the end of the day, a sword and an axe, both of them would rend flesh. They would be instruments of death, of killing. So what makes one more civilized than the other? And that's kind of a lesson that Kull has to learn, because Kull, unlike Conan, Kull actually does in this movie try to sort of put aside his barbaric past and embrace civilization, even though it doesn't really work. At one point he throws away his axe and he starts using a sword, and we see that he's never really as effective of a warrior with a sword as he was with his axe. In fact, whenever he and Talagaro would face each other with a sword, Talagaro actually usually came out on top. It was only at the end that he again fell back on his barbaric nature and used the axe that he was finally able to defeat Talagaro. So he kind of learns that lesson, and again at the end he's, by this axe I rule, as he uses it to chop down, knock down, destroy the written stone laws of Volusia. Again, I think this is just the way of pointing out that just because something is civilized, just because something is written, doesn't always mean that it's right. And so Kull realizes that and acknowledges that as he, breaks the laws of Volusia, both literally and figuratively there, as he sort of ushers in a new era for Volusia, one free of slavery and things of that nature. Speaking of the slavery, there was one great little moment that's really easy to miss if you're not looking closely. If you ever go back and watch this movie again, I invite you to do so. Early on in the movie, when Kull is, freeing all the slaves, and he realizes that's a lot easier said than done, because the very first guy he frees is like, where do I go? I was born in the palace. And Kull's like, well then from now on you'll receive a fair wage. And then the second guy that he frees does have another home that he wants to return to. But if you notice closely, as the guy's all smiling and starting to make his exit, you see the two guards at the entryway just kind of block his way with the two big spear-like weapons they're holding there, kind of like saying, like, you're not going anywhere, buddy. And so that was kind of an amusing little touch in there. And there were different things like that, like Juba like offering hors d'oeuvres on the ship, fish eyes and things like that. This weird little, we're trying to be so civilized out here on the high seas, and that kind of thing that just didn't really work that well. They do make quite a few allusions in this movie that Kull does have a pretty rich past. It mentions his time as a slave, as a pirate, and different things of that nature, which, I like the idea that, there's a lot of history to this character, even if we don't always understand what it is. So the movie ends in a lot of ways with a kiss, because Zaretta, who apparently for whatever reason could also tell fortunes, tells Kull that the fate of his kingdom would be found in a kiss. And so toward the end of the movie, Zaretta becomes the carrier of the breath of Vulca. Which, by the way, speaking of Vulca, in this movie they make it out to be that worship the religion of Vulca is illegal. It's not allowed anymore, and because that's one of the first things that Kull does is he institutes freedom of religion. He says, let men worship what gods that they will. Again, showing that in this so-called civilized society, they didn't even have something as basic as freedom of religion. And for whatever reason, Vulca is outlawed. Now, it doesn't seem that they are worshiping the gods of Acheron either, because, Anaros, the priest, acts like, he's kind of the only guy that's doing that. So it's kind of weird, because it's like, what did they replace it with? I mean, what was the accepted, what was the approved god worship, whatever, of Volusia at that time? Or was there none? Or was there this push to eradicate religion totally? Because it does make the mention early on in the movie as the flame of Acheron was allowed to burn to remind people of godless times. So perhaps Volusia is just godless at this time. Or perhaps it was something else. But that's never really explained. That's never really cleared up. Why was it suddenly so bad to, be a follower of Vulca? That's never really explained. So, back to the kiss. So, Zaretta, she has the breath of Vulca, which, then with a kiss, she passes on to Kull. And so, at this point, Akivasha, the Red Witch, she has transformed. She has taken on this very grotesque demon form, which I gotta say, whatever effect, whatever model, whatever they used there, looked pretty good. It was rather disgusting looking, and one of the great moments in the movie that really stands out is when Kull just has to grab her by this grotesque face and plant a kiss on her to transfer the breath of Vulca into Akivasha so it will douse her flames and consume her. And great little bit, right after he kisses her, Kull spits something out of his mouth. I don't know, it was just something that it looked vaguely white and chunky, and it was just really gross, but also a really nice touch. So I've droned on long enough about this over 20-year-old movie, this over 20-year-old, pretty cheesy, terrible movie that, oddly enough, I still like. I still love this movie. It's one of those movies I can throw on the DVD and just turn off my brain and let it play and do other things and let it just sort of run. And I just kind of, to this day, still enjoy it. Is it Robert E. Howard's Kull? No, it's not. And if they ever tried to make another Kull movie, I would definitely want it to be a lot different than this one. But for me, it has its time, it has its place in my heart, and I kind of dig this movie just a little bit. And if it's been a long time since you've seen it, I would invite you, find a copy, download, stream, whatever, and watch Kull the Conqueror again. Watch it with an open mind. Have fun. Don't take it so seriously. And enjoy this terrible movie for what it is, which for me is entertaining. And so I hope you've enjoyed listening. And please like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And we'll see you next time. Later.